I'm about to post that on YouTube. All right. Thank you so much for being here, Håkan. Warmly welcome you on our podcast here today. Sorry for everyone watching on YouTube. We got a little bit delayed because of StreamYard. We were having a little choppy voice, and me and Håkan were trying to figure this out. But we thought, we should get back on our trusted Zoom. I'm very excited to actually have Håkan over on our podcast. Håkan is a sought-after speaker and leading researcher in emotional psychology and affective computing using AI. He holds a Master of Science degree in electrical engineering, and he also holds a master's degree in leadership and organizational behavior. He has taken different courses at university level in psychology, interaction design, human-computer interaction. He has 20 years of experience in software development in various positions as developer, as tester, architect, the system project manager. He's also a scrum master. He's a practice manager and team lead. He does a lot of work with .NET also. He's in fact the chairman of the local chapter of the Norwegian .NET user group Oslo, also known as NNUG, and is an active member and ambassador for Oslo.AI, the local chapter for the global City.AI community as well. Håkan has the coveted title for Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in AI. He's currently working as manager of AI and big data at Miles AS, a Norwegian consultancy company. He has worked internationally, both in Scandinavia as well as in the US. And I found his work deeply helpful in regards with how computers and humans interact with each other in a way that makes it more sustainable and has an actually practical implementation and use cases in personal lives in terms of mental health, in terms of psychology, in terms of emotional intelligence. So these are the things that we'll be talking about today a lot. Thank you so much for being here, Håkan.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I am very excited to actually have you, and thank you so much for being here so late. I believe it's quite cold in Scandinavia this time of year.
Well, actually, it's probably around 10 degrees something, but it's quite dark outside and quite rainy too. So
Mhm.
we're looking forward
And
to the brighter side when it starts to snow, because then it's not so dark.
yes, I mean, I remember living in Sweden many years ago, and we were all looking forward to the snow so that it brightens up a little bit, and otherwise it can get really dark and gloomy. Um, but I hope that you're looking forward to coming holidays as well.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Håkan, so I'll start with a quote from Marvin Minsky in his book, The Society of Mind, that he already wrote in 1985, which was one of the first attempts into bridging the gap between machines and humans. And it goes like this. The question is not whether intelligent machines can have any emotions, but whether machines can be intelligent without emotions. And subsequent work from Rosalinda Picard's Atom Media Lab takes it further with her brilliant book, Affective Computing, that we have talked about earlier. I was just wondering, how close are we to having a machine that is emotionally intelligent?
I think mm, I think we can first try to define here what we mean with a machine that is emotional intelligent, because it's one thing, that we can use some techniques here, like for example we can use image recognition, and we can detect where is the face, and we can also get an emotion rating of that face, and through that emotion rating we can uh, decide if a person is angry, or if he or she is surprised, and so on. Or we can do text analytics on a large chunk of text, and we can do a sentence analysis and see if it's on average is it a positive or is it a negative feelings associated with our products, for example. But I think it's a long step to go from there to actually being able to be you know to be able to reason about this thing. What does it actually mean? Because it's the same thing for us humans. For example, so a person could be sarcastic, or he could actually be straight out lying, and there's no really easy way for us to actually decide that as of now. So then I think it's quite a hefty goal to put that on an AI or machine learning algorithm to be able to do something that humans are not able to do right now.
Hmm. I was also wondering about the dichotomy of measurement of emotions. For example, how do we actually measure the visceral signs of emotions, like change in human vitals, something that you can quantitatively measure, like pulse and heartbeat and respiration? So that's something that we can put a number on. So if you go
Mhm.
to a hospital and you have a specific condition, these are the first things that doctor actually check, your vital signs.
Yes.
And these are not the things that are visible on your face unless it's very painful that bends you out of shape. Now, there's one thing that we know, that if you're smiling, or if you're weeping, or if you're angry, or have a disgust face. I've seen your presentation at Confer conference, and it was
Mhm.
brilliant in regards that you address all of these issues, that we can actually, to some level, using computer vision, capture the emotional state that's apparent. But these visceral emotions that are not visible to others, how do we actually measure that? I mean, one of the ways that we can probably do that is use a gadget like Fitbit
Mhm.
to go along with the emotions that you can wear on your ankle, or you wear as a bracelet, and it gives you continuous output from the oxygen levels of your skin, and how sensitive that is, level of sweat, heartbeat, and things like this. And I was just wondering, how would you actually capture the whole essence of emotions, and if they're only facial expression? Because, like you said, we can simply act out our emotions also, they not being real. So how do we actually match those two measurements, and then ascertain the fact that these emotions are real?
Mm. Yeah. So what we can do now, at least in lab, is that we can use, AI or machine learning to do this, both the face recognition and face analysis. But then we have to do, to put on some measurement devices onto the test person. Like, for example, one of the strongest indicators is actually skin conductance. So the way that you measure that is you put a small thing on your fingers actually, and then you can measure the skin conductance, which is a good indicator. But it's also, it is a complex phenomenon. So what I think is important here is that you can never get any 100% reliability, but you can always get like an indication, or you can see like a trend. So maybe even if you can't, measure that one person is in a specific emotional state, maybe if you measure it over a population of 10 or hundreds or something, then I think you can get a better overall measure of the whole emotion rating of that population.
Okay. I was also wondering, the language itself is very complicated phenomena. So we have a lot of research in AI domain that goes into understanding the syntax and predicting what's coming up ahead. So some of the examples that we have already seen are from GPT-3 and its capabilities of understanding and writing human-like text almost. It does makes it mistake, but then again, its computer sophistication level that it has gotten to is really incredible for a machine. So you simply feed them the text, and using the neurolinguistic programming, it actually outputs things that sound human. I was just wondering if we use the same principle and transfer it to computer vision and emotional psychology in AI domain, how does that actually computer finds the difference between our different smiles? So in English language, we have different ways of defining our smiles. So we can smile, we can chuckle, there's a sneer, there's a smirk. So these are very different flavors of the same emotion. Is that something that we can quantify in any possible way?
Well, as of now, as always with the machine learning algorithms, it always goes back to what kind of data have they been trained on. So if someone has made that fine granularity between a smile and a smirk and so on, then we would be able to decide upon the differences and detect the different types of smiles. But as far as I know, that hasn't really been done. So we just try to distinguish between broader set or broader categories of emotions. So we haven't really come down to that fine granular approach.
Okay. Expanding on this concept a little bit, we know a little bit about how algorithm works. There's a famous TED talk by Dr. Rana Bukele, which has millions of views on YouTube, detecting the facial expression of one of the people's from the audience, and when she smiles, and it detects and how likely is that to be categorized into a smile or a disgust face or horrified face, which is unbelievably interesting for a machine. And then we have some other experiments which are far-reaching and more awe-inspiring, which are one of the papers that I've recently shared with you also and studied, and I've always been inspired of that, is the Gottman studies. So what they do is that they're amazingly good at predicting the divorce by inviting different couples in a lab which they call Love Lab, and then they get to stay there for one day, and they talk to each other in different circumstances. They talk about different issues. Some could be positive, some could be negative, some could be conflicts. At the end of the study, reading their facial expression and observing their interactions, they put a number on how soon are they likely to divorce or not, are they going to have the happy life. And it amazes me the accuracy. I think it's above 90s or something that they're able to correctly predict the divorce. And I think this level of accuracy in predicting human emotions, for me, it's really scary. Does it scare you also?
Yeah, I think up till now there has been a lot of discussions about personable, identifiable information, and it's been a lot of discussion about tracking people and tracking what we do, and you know because there's always two sides of every coin here. Either the more information that we give from us, the better and the more personalized the services that we use can be. But that also means that we will have to give up lots of our privacy, and things that maybe were unheard of like 10, 15 years ago. We don't really think about it right now because we take it for granted that you know the like big actors, they can use and track what we're looking at so that we can actually get advertisements that are much more suited to us. So maybe by now we don't really think about it that much, but I think this is going one step beyond that, because now what we're doing is we actually expose our inner feelings that which are very private to us, and which are much more personal than this personable identifiable information, because this PII is much more static, and maybe there are also other ways that you could actually find that information, but our own emotions and how we feel in a specific context is something that is very personable, and something that we probably don't want to give from us in a light manner. So what I think is important is both that there should be a debate that now we know that we're entering into an era where these types of techniques will be coming much more and more common, and that this kind of data will probably be used more and more also by both by the big tech companies, but also by it could be by government and by society at large. But so I think one important thing to think about is about legislation. And once we can get a broader understanding of that these things exist and the problems that are associated with it, then we can also start to have an open conversation and open discussion about what should actually be allowed and what should not be allowed. And I know that, for example, I live in Norway, and here in Norway there's a debate and discussions about establishing something they call an algorithmic agency, which should act like more or less like a little bit of a judge, and try to judge when a company is using more intrusive machine learning or AI algorithms. Then someone needs to be able to review it from a more objective point of view, and to give a recommendation on should this actually be allowed to be put out in the wild.
I think it's a very interesting perspective from the point of view that Scandinavia has always been on the forward side when it comes to new ideas and implementing them before anyone else. And a recent development that you're probably aware of is the embedding of microchips in human body, so that a lot of things that we need time for, like airport checks and social security systems, they become automated, and you don't have to actually stand in line for these things, and it can be used for a lot of other things. And we were talking about this new development in Norway, where they have a lot of data from different communes and different counties, and we're talking about the specific case where in certain counties, if you live there and you have a certain income and you come from a certain background, you're more likely to be jobless, and that would be an extra expense on public exchequer. So if you can identify that in time, you can focus on welfare and developmental aid to that specific county, so the chances of them becoming jobless, and of course the psychological consequences of that, being depressed or getting into drugs, can be minimized. But don't you think at the same time Scandinavia bears a huge risk of some kind of Orwellian hegemony by the government, where they can access everything, anytime, anywhere, from any person who has this microchip? So just like taking your mother everywhere you go.
Yep. I think that actually goes back to, they have made lots of studies. So there's sociologists and psychologists that have made studies in different cultures and tried to rate these cultures and see what is the difference between different cultures in different kind of measures. And one of these measures was was about trust. How well does the citizens in a specific country trust their government and their leaders? And the countries that always comes on top of this trust measurement are the Nordic countries, like Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and Finland. So from a historical point of view, there's always been a high level of trust between the citizens and the government. So I think that plays in. That has a lot to say, like this example that you were talking about. So what they have done is there is it's a governmental agency that they give out both welfare money, and they also give out money if if you get sick or if you're unemployed and so on. And they have lots of statistics. So what they can do with this statistic is they can try to trace, is there a specific route? So if first this thing happen and maybe you lose your job, and then maybe you're unemployed for a specific amount of time, then you stand the risk that into becoming unemployed for a much longer time. But if we can put in some measurements before that, so maybe we can put this person into give him the possibility to take a class or something, or to retrain into a different trade or different skills, then we can avoid this thing. Because one very important thing is to get everyone, give everyone the possibility to be able to to earn their pay, to have a job. And that's one of the ways that they've been using AI and machine learning in order to be able to detect these different routes and paths that a person can take, and what is the time when a person stands a high risk of becoming unemployed, for example, for a long time.
Now, don't you think that you still have the chance to actually be able to wrongly be alerted of a minority, and the system itself can turn, out of no mistake of anyone, a lot biased than it was meant to be? For example, we have known a lot of issues that has been highlighted in police department, where some of the more corrupt policemen, according to the algorithms, were more likely to be promoted as the role model policemen, and they found out that there's a bias in the system, relying on AI algorithms primarily for such policies. Do you think it's justified, especially in the sense where we're talking about a lot of minorities involved? Because generally we know from social sciences data that minorities are more likely to be in a lower social economic class, which has inversely proportional relationship with well-being and psychological stability. Would these policies that you're indicating be voluntarily available to people, or everyone will have to have a smart chip, or they will have to provide this data for the government? Because if it comes to the voting, I do understand your point that a lot of Scandinavian people have very high trust in their governments, but on the same side, if you look at the voting statistics, it has always been less than 65. If I'm not mistaken, it's the same case in Sweden also, which is generally a sign of voter apathy. So if there are people who are not in majority and did not actually vote, out of some kind of legislation, they're forced to have a smart chip on their body. Do you know the dilemma that we're in here at the moment?
Mm. Yeah, so I think so. Yeah, so there has also been other examples of that, bias. They have made studies in the US where they wanted to have an AI algorithm to help where in recruitment, but then unfortunately that algorithm had been trained on a data set where which was highly skewed. So there were much more male candidates than females, for example. So that also so then that bias carried over when they put this machine learning algorithm out in production. So that meant that for women it was even more difficult to get an interview because they were automatically filtered away from the candidates that would go into the first round. But I think what is important here is that we need to think about bias and how we can avoid bias in all phases of a machine learning project. So both from the way that we collect data and also how we do then when we have trained the data, we can also test if our data is biased, and then we can also do test out in the production to see if we have a biased data or not. Yeah. And then also just as a comment, because I think that statistic has to be wrong here, because at least I'm not sure in Norway, but in Sweden it's been a high amount of voters for the past 30 years or something like that. But yeah, that was just a parenthesis.
Yes, but like you said, the voter confidence is probably growing, but it still is below the voter apathy line, which is by general consensus is 65%. You probably are keeping up with the latest development in the world. Also, we have governments in whole Europe and also in US, which are very populist and divisive, and it employs a lot of rhetoric. With the recent defeat of Trump, a lot of people think that that would be a win for and a backstep from more divisive policies. And I don't think in this skepticism I'm alone here. There are a lot of people who have similar questions. I'm a part of a group, the Milton Keynes Institute, that we have a lot of these discussions on the human side of AI and the dangers and the promises of that. One of the most skeptical figures against the misuse of AI, surprisingly himself, is Elon Musk. So if you have listened to his podcast with Joe Rogan, it's about 2-3 hours. It's a very interesting conversation. He has been a very staunch skeptic of AI and the possibility of destruction that it can bring to the world. So he has met Obama when he was in office about it, and he's met with different congressmen. What do you think that he's missing out in the promises of AI that we don't yet see?
I think it's it's very difficult to predict the future. So I think it's difficult for anyone, both for Elon Musk or Stephen Hawking or anyone, to actually predict what will happen in the future. But what you can do right now, what I think we could do is, we could try to listen to the research community, to the people that are in the front line of what is happening in machine learning in AI, and see what are they thinking about the risk in the future. Will it be is it a threat for humans, or can we be hopeful? So there is a researcher, Max Tegmark. He has done a survey among the leading research community, and then he has asked them, so if AI will reach this state of artificial general intelligence, will that be a good thing or will it be a bad thing? And also, how far are we from that state? And then there is virtually no one, or a very small amount of people, that think that this will appear, in the next decades or something. But then there is a larger group which thinks it's between, maybe 30, 40 years from now until like 300 years or something. And then there's a last group of people who thinks that this will take more than 300 years, or maybe we will never reach that stage. And then within this bigger chunk of researchers, then you can divide these people into either this digital utopians, so that they believe that it's good regardless, or there's also a group who think this is bad, it will be bad for development of humans, or people that are actually in between. So so I think that if these people that are working on this, they in their daily life and are on the front line, if not even they can, get an agreement into what is wrong or what's right here. I think the best thing that we can do is try to have an open debate and try to have these discussions right now, because I think that it's right now that we can actually talk about this. So it wasn't that right now it's a lot of talks and discussions about ethics and AI in ethics. But if we go back only 5 or 6 years ago, then there was at least at one point in time there was only one research group in Oxford that was talking about that we should think about ethics and AI together. So but yeah, so I think that that is the important thing, to bring this out into the public domain, that people should be aware of where we are going and what are the possibilities and what are the potential downfalls of this.
I mean, you're right in the sense that we have a lot of world-class researchers coming on our show. So I've recently been talking to Josh Starman. You probably know of him. He's probably the most famous channel on machine learning on YouTube, where he actually breaks down complicated statistical concepts and visualize them for public understanding. I've talked to him. I've talked to Dr. Marcus Arsted, who is one of the leading researchers on structural equation modeling, and a lot of other people. And generally, you find two people in scientific domain. One who, if we're using financial terms, are very bullish on AI, and then the other who are very skeptics, who take the bearish view on how it would work. So if I were to give you an option personally for you, would you actually rank the capabilities of AI higher, or then you're more of a skeptic, or you see it on the fence here?
Well, I think maybe either I'm sitting sort of on the fence, but maybe more on the positive side of the fence.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think that throughout the history of humans here, there has always been, technologies and things that can actually leads to a mass destruction. But somehow, as a human race, we've always been able to keep these forces in place. So I think that is what will happen here too. But that's only my personal opinion.
Okay.
But one thing that I also would like to stress here is because I said that it's important to bring these things out into the public domain, but that also means that for the general public, they need to also to be aware of what is AI and what can you do with it. And here I think education plays a vital role here. And I think one really nice initiative has been done by the Finnish government. So in Finland, they have a goal. They have as a goal for Finland that everyone should have a basic education or basic knowledge about AI. So what they have done is they have, together with the Finnish university, they have developed an online course which is called Elements of AI, Elements of AI, and then anyone can take this for free. And I've also distributed it out into the European community, and it's been translated to different types of languages so that it should be accessible to as many persons as possible. So I think that's so I think education has a very important role to play here.
I think I've studied quite a lot in Swedish system as a young student back in the days. And we can probably agree that Sweden has, or Scandinavia in general, has been on the cutting edge on a lot of technologies that have been beneficial for human race. So we have seen a lot of companies and ideas generating from Scandinavia, and we can agree that they're very good at identifying the patterns and the skills for the modern times, and that they've foreseen that and capitalized on that. And we're going to be talking further down in this podcast about your own initiative on AI that you're taking. But let's take a moment here and talk about emotional psychology and its origins. I mean, you have talked a lot in your presentation and different speaking engagements that human beings have always been an emotional species. Our limbic system actually takes over our cortex, and this is evident in irrational choices people actually make on each levels. We have addictions, we have aggression, we have emotional lability, we have drug choices, so many things that from a rational point of view is absolutely ridiculous, but we still make them because we are essentially emotional beings. Now, one of the strengths that these big companies have found in our weakness is to actually be able to predict when and how we're going to feel the way we do. And that has turned into seasonality indicators, and personal choices. So think of Netflix; it actually recommends you movies based on what you've already seen. You go to a library and it suggests you different books. We have different projects that suggest different restaurants if you're a foodie. And these are the things that are actually turning out very well for big companies like Facebook and Google, so they can personalize things for you. Now, from their perspective, it's very profitable. But at some point, don't you think that it's we are becoming too predictable for these companies to actually play into their hands?
Mm. I think that's a very interesting question here. So I think it's always important to have a balance, but at the same time, it's always difficult to have a balance if you, as as a commercial company, see that if you employ this kind of technologies, you can gain much more viewers, or you can gain much more purchases, for example. So again, it goes back to a little bit what we were discussing initially in this podcast when we were talking about that legislation has probably a big role here to play, because it's always the thing that a lot of these things they were not possible to do, like if we go back 10 years ago, or maybe even less. So a lot of these things are so new, so that probably a lot of the legislation hasn't really kept up with the recent developments in machine learning and what we can actually use these technologies to.
I think on a very bright and optimistic side, there's so much work that is being done to use this technology for the benefit of society in general and learning. So one specific instance, I remember reading this paper by Andrew McStay, and it just came out like a couple of months ago, I think. And that's about educational technology and how companies are deploying emotional AI to quantify social and emotional learning. And they're focusing on facial coding emotional AI that uses computer vision and algorithms to see, recognize, categorize, and learn about facial expressions of emotion. And this paper actually evaluates the nascent usage of these technologies in education. I also know that there's a lot of stress uh, being given on teaching students emotional management earlier in school these days, because the data is very clear that because of these recent technological developments, social fiber has become really weak, especially in more advanced Western countries, and data is manifested itself in a lot of loneliness and higher suicide rates and mental health disorders. And I was just wondering, how do you see this development where actually these things can be used to prepare a whole generation or people who who are, let's say, more unstable when it comes to emotional dealing with people?
I think it's I mean it's positive the more that people are aware that we as a human species are actually governed a lot by emotions. That a lot of people they think that it's logic, and maybe especially when in there that I'm coming from, in in the engineering and the computer science areas, a lot of people think that rationality and logic is what actually is governing our lives. But if we come down to the roots, it comes down to emotions and how we can handle our emotions and how we can better deal with our emotions. So I think any types of ways that we can improve that, and we can be much more aware of our own emotions, I think is a positive thing. And if we can use this these type of technologies in order to have a better understanding at the young age, I think that's a good thing.
Mm. I think one of the other ways that we can educate a younger generation in these times is from teaching them the history of psychology itself. Hans Eisner is probably one of the most quoted and cited psychologists of all time, and he emphasized on the fact that most of counseling and feel good psychology doesn't actually stand to the test of time, and he does. Reiterate the fact that only things that can be quantified and measured should be used to diagnose and actually build policies on. And then we have a lot darker history of IQ also, where people have used it for the disadvantage of minorities. And then we have Milgram experiment and a lot of other things that are very distasteful. But we also know that some of the things that psychology has been able to correctly predict is human temperament through something called personality psychology. And in personality psychology, specifically Big Five personality test, which has had hundred of a year of research behind it. And then we have cross-cultural, multi-group, and multi-gender samples in that. And one of the things that we know from that is that using these advanced neural networks, we have been able to exactly predict human personality disorders and the personality types that people generally fall into. Now, so one of the things that we know from clinical psychology literature is that women specifically have a higher neuroticism, or let's say emotional ability issues, in comparison to men who have higher antisocial personality disorders. And that's why most of the inmates in a prison cell would be men and not women. So they have their own extremes based on the data that we have. Do you think that AI, if you're actually able to predict personalities from a very young age, let's say high school or school, that would give us a window into what might be a looming disaster in the future, and take preventative action, just like we do in medical sciences?
Mm. I think so, but also if we take if we look at medical science and with genetics, there's also this risk that maybe for some things maybe you don't really want to know when you're when you're at a young age, that probably I have this lethal disease that I can't really do anything. Really can't do anything to prevent. So I think there's always a balance somewhere. But obviously, if we can improve this people's mental health at a young stage by using these tools, that's a positive thing, I think.
Mm. It's very interesting. It fascinates me as someone who has researched this quite a lot. And one of the perspective from one of my favorite scientists on this is from a perspective of emotions in an evolutionary perspective. So it's not only human beings who have emotions as their primary decision making process. For example, Robert Sapolsky's work at Stanford is incredibly valuable, which establishes that the way you look at your beloved spouse or girlfriend or anyone actually engenders the same biochemical reaction as if you were seeing your dog. So I mean, the love itself, the biochemical processes within your body, I mean, if you're measuring that, would exactly be the same. So the oxytocin or testosterone or adrenaline, all these processes have the same translation mechanism across animals and human beings. So it can safely be said that emotions are species-wide phenomena, and it doesn't actually pigeonhole us as human beings. Now, do you think that love, fear, hate, loss, embarrassment, grief, they can be actually measured in all species, and is that something that should we should focus more research on that?
Yeah, but again, it's it's always a little bit difficult, with animals, because it's difficult to ask them. With a human, we can always do an observation, and then after the observation, we can do either an interview, or we can do a questionnaire, or we can, different types of test setups in order to guarantee that what we actually observed was, was the real thing, and the way that we have interpreted what happened was a correct interpretation. But it's it always gets a lot trickier with animals, because we can't really ask them afterwards. But what we can do is, we can also measure this physical measurements, and we can use them in order to try to deduce if it's highly probable that our theory was correct or not. So yeah, but I think I mean, at least in theory, it should be possible to do that, to be able to measure the emotions both in humans and in animals.
Okay. Now, coming to some of the practical aspects of things that we're talking about here, you are a Microsoft MVP, specifically in the AI domain, and the Microsoft has its own version of their open source toolkit, which is the CNTK, or the Microsoft Cognitive Toolkit, and that's a commercial graded distributed deep learning platform, and it has a series of neural networks and computational steps with directed graphs, and it allows you to realize and combine popular models like feeding forward DNNs and CNNs and different other forms of neural networks. So I was just wondering, from a technical perspective, you are someone who has been at the leading forefront of .NET and other Microsoft technologies, and from a technical perspective, how promising do you think this open source framework from Microsoft, and how does it actually stack up to other OpenAI platforms like OpenAI's GPT-3 and Google's own version of that? And what are your views on that?
Yeah, so I think from a technical perspective, we should take into account that there are many different ways that we can use AI. So one of the way that we can use it is more to use AI out of the box. So in this regard, Microsoft has this cognitive services suite, which is basically a set of APIs that you can just call as a developer. You can just make a REST call to REST API, and then you will get maybe your prediction back. And then these are also services which are very easy to, if you want to train them, then you can just use this pre-made services, and then you can provide them with your own material for training. So that's one way that you can use the Microsoft AI stack. But then you can also go a step below that, and you can use Databricks, for example, and you can use that. You can have data in a data lake, and you can do training and testing, and then you can also automatically deploy it through a machine learning pipeline, so that after a while you get it out onto out onto a Docker container or Kubernetes, and then you can deploy it out in the organization, and then anyone else can use that also just through a REST call. And with that, there's nothing preventing you from using, TensorFlow or any types of libraries with that. So there are many different ways that you can use AI, both in the Microsoft stack, but also, for Google and for Amazon, and most of these cloud providers have similar types of capabilities. And I think that's also important, going forward here, to realize that, in order to work with AI, some people, if you want to work with research or developing new machine learning algorithms, then you need to know everything. You need to have, a strong foundation in mathematics in order to understand and in order to develop new algorithms and so on. But if you just want to use this, like the cognitive service alternative that I was talking about, then you only need to know what do I want to do, and then you can use these services, and you're fine with that. So yeah. So what that means is that even if you don't have a strong mathematical background, there's still a way that you can use AI without having to worry about it. And as always, it's also always comes back to this thing with what is actually the problem that you want to solve, and is AI or machine learning, is that a good candidate for that problem, or can you use it without it?
I mean, if SIDA happens to be the business partner with both Microsoft and IBM in Pakistan, and we have play a lot of play with their products a lot in our whole developmental chain. And one of the things that I've found out that Microsoft has been lagging in the artificial intelligence domain, at least in comparison, for quite some margin now. For example, Google Assistant and Apple Siri probably understand human beings a little bit better than the Cortana, which a lot of people didn't actually like. I don't know how sophisticated that has become now. And one of the other products that we have actually used in our own recruitment is IBM's Watson chatbot, which has been very easy to configure in many ways. There's drag and drop sets of questions and progressions and logics that you can program without actually having to know a lot about programming and conditional loops. And that has been something that Microsoft has always been missing for some time now. One of the latest developments that I've actually surprisingly found with R is that it cuts the journey from developing code and then depending on a DevOps professional to deploy that with a lot of complex Kubernetes and Dockers and Jenkins intermediary to provide end users an interface. For example, if you have written an R code in RStudio, you can simply deploy that as a Shiny app that goes directly to the RStudio Shiny app portal, and you have your app ready there. I was just wondering, would Microsoft become a little bit more easier in that regard? And in this specific scenario, both IBM and Google also, that actually will get a lot of DevOps job in scalable applications.
I think as a comment to that, I think we also need to take into account here how we're going to use this machine learning component, because it's one way to develop some sort of machine learning thing in R, and then you can deploy it through Shiny. But it's difficult if you want to integrate this into a much larger component, or integrate into a workflow, for example. So what Microsoft has done is they want AI to be a natural component into everyday enterprise applications. So they want it to be able to integrate in the same way as we integrate other enterprise applications. So I think that's why they have done this this way, for example, that you can deploy it through a Docker container or through a Kubernetes, because that's the way that a lot of this, at least in the enterprise world, is going nowadays. That it's easy both to debug and deploy and make sure that you have the same type of environment as a developer as what is running out into production. But I also know, since a lot of the things that we get to know as MVPs are under NDA, I can't give you any details. But what I can say is that there's a lot of things going on within AI in Microsoft. So we will see a lot both during next year and the years to follow. So I think we just need to be patient and keep our eyes open.
I mean, I get a feeling from this is that I've recently talked to Jason Myers from Google about his work on TensorFlow.js, and we've had a very candid conversation about how Google actually approaches different clients and what are the things that they're more passionate and interested about. And it seems like all these big blue chip companies, not only in regards with AI, but in general, tech companies have been very focused for understandable reasons on larger enterprise clients, multi-million or billion-dollar clients. And that leaves us with a very small number of companies or institutes who are teaching people AI without any prerequisites or without any assumptions of knowledge on their part. And that's just why we have a very dispersed community of passionate learners. I mean, I'm a university professor, so I know a lot of my students want to learn more about it. They want to know how artificial intelligence work, how machine learning can improve their life, how they can use that in their own research. But the resources are very scattered and limited. And this is why a lot of these small courses are surfacing and are hugely popular, like AI and machine learning courses on Coursera and deeplearning.ai. And then we have EduRake and other platforms. But at some point, the learning curve and the amount of investment that you need to make in it becomes very deep. You have recently partnered with one of your colleagues from Denmark, and you're thinking of making a big platform of easily available free courses that would help people in understanding basic AI concepts, math and statistics, and its practical usages in our daily life, so that they do not feel overwhelmed by a lot of numbers. Tell us a little bit more about this initiative.
Yep. So maybe first, as a prelude to this, I should probably tell a little bit about how I came into the AI and into the ML field. So so basically, I started out as an engineer, and I was working for a large organization, but I was working a lot with user interfaces, and I was working with how can we as humans understand information. I was working with data visualization and different new types of inputs, and how you can work with data. And then after a while, I also got interested into what are the possibilities and what are the challenges for us as humans when we look at this data. Maybe we're looking at the pipe, and we want to know what is the velocity of the flow in that pipe, or what is the temperature in the boiler, and so on. How can we actually interpret all of these types of information? And that led me into the field of psychology. So I was studying psychology, and then after a while, I also got interested into machine learning and AI. And then the first thing that I wanted to know, how can I go about into learn about machine learning and data science and AI. So what I did was I was looking at Coursera, which was a popular platform. So this was around 2014, I think. So at Coursera, they had this program which ran over a year, or it was 10 courses. Each course was 1 month, which was called the data science specialization. And that specialization is actually it's provided now also. But what it gave me was, it gave me a good foundation, because then you started from how can you how should you work with data, how should you clean your data, how can you do feature engineering, all the way, and how can you do testing of different types of algorithms, all the way to how can we deploy this. So in this program, everything was in R, so we were also deploying it as a Shiny app. And then I was also taking other classes. But what I can see, or what I can see now today, is that you can assemble this information by putting together different dispersed resources in Coursera, edX, or Udemy, or Udacity, and so on. But what we found is that there's no one place where you can actually start from scratch and then get get the possibility to build up your knowledge step by step. So what me and MVP colleague Eva Pardy from Denmark, what we have done is we have put together like a curriculum of core courses that we think that everyone should have some knowledge in. So what we'll start is we will start with basic mathematics, like functions and vector matrices, and then we will go into probability and statistics, and then after that we'll go into because it's also important that we know how to work with data. So then we will learn about SQL, and we'll learn with different languages like Python and R, for example, to to be able for us to work more with the data. And we will also go into deep learning and Power BI, Databricks, some more tools focused sessions, and we will also have a set of much more practical workshops where we can put these things that we have learned into practice. And then finally, we also have some more advanced topics like ethical and responsible AI, or it can be reinforcement learning, or it can be the introduction to NLP, for example. So what we would like to do is we would like to provide this so that anyone on this globe should be able to have the chance to learn about these new important technologies. And they could either, maybe they don't have the basics in mathematics, then they could come to this course in order to learn to get an understanding of that, or maybe if they already have it, then they can go into more this intermediary sessions with these workshops, or if they know that and they're just interested into the latest more advanced topics, then they can just wait until that. So the way that we will carry out this is through streams. So we will invite industry experts and recognized speakers. So me and Eva will more be the host of this initiative, which we have called AI 42, because we think that AI is the answer to all our questions. So our plan is we will start this new thing in January, and then we will do a stream every second week, so two times a month. So so you can search for AI 42 on Twitter or on Facebook or on Instagram, and you will find us, and you can just subscribe to us, and then you will get notified when we go live. So I think
Okay.
I hope this will be a good way for everyone to be able to have an easy access into this information.
Okay. And what are some of the pedagogical methods that you're going to be using in teaching? Is it only going to be talks, or we're going to have live exercises or interactive assignments, or visualizations? What do you think?
So what we'll have is we will have so it will not be just a regular talk or presentation. So the focus here is actually on to teach and to build a community. So we will both have exercises in the stream, but we will also provide extra material so that people can try out for themselves. So we will have a blog associated with this AI 42 initiative, so that people can come there and download extra material or download exercises that they can try out more in their free time.
Okay, very interesting. Let's take a diversion from, or let's say a welcome break from technical side, and focus on you as a person. I believe this is the first time that you have, from what I know, having a one-on-one conversation instead of a normal speech or a talk in a conference, and that gives a lot more room to talk not only about your work but you as an engineer also, and we at Saida, we put a lot of emphasis on human side of work also, because that has been a huge um, uptrend in modern workplaces, that people become very um, ingrained in their work, not able to actually plug off themselves from the stress and frustrations of work, and that leads to a lot of mental health issues. So what do you personally actually do to forget about some of the complex challenges that you're thinking about at work? And do you run, do you exercise, do you have good friends, and what do you recommend for
Mm.
a lot of our viewers and students also to keep your sanity in times of machines?
Mm. So I think one thing which is actually a psychological concept is the concept of flow. So I think he's a Polish researcher with difficult to pronounce names. So I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but you can just Google it. But what he says is that the best thing that you can do is if you can reach a state where the task you have, it's not too easy, so that it gets mundane or boring, but it's not so difficult that you think that this is too much for me, but you're sort of in some in some sort of area where you can feel that this is something uh, that can handle and that you can master, and which is exciting. And what will happen then is you can reach a state of flow, and the way that materializes is that itself is often that you actually forget time and place, and that has actually happened quite a lot of times. So even though you can achieve flow in your in your working day when you work with your technical stuff, you can also achieve flow with, for example, if you run, if you're a long distance runner, for example. Maybe you have experienced the way that after you run for a certain amount of time, then you feel that I could run like this forever, and you don't really need to think about the movement that I now things are almost automatically, and it can open up also so that you can think about things, you can get ideas and inspirations that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So that's one thing that I can recommend. And the other thing is also if you're interested into music, you can learn to play a music instrument. Like you can learn to play the piano, or learn to play the guitar, or anything that that amuses you. So try to do something which gets you very immersive.
Okay.
Uh,
I think, sure, go ahead.
Yep. And then another thing which I also can recommend. So I took also some classes in emotional psychology, and one part of that was actually about colors and color psychology, and how colors actually can influence our health. And then we went to a special lab where they had like a 360-degree um, monitors, so that you went into a room and then you could actually control what color should be displayed. So all of a sudden you were totally immersed in orange, for example, or into green, and then you could feel yourself that maybe now this time, for some reason that maybe I can't really explain, but this special dark blue gives me a special calm feeling, for example, and maybe that can be very relieving to experience that.
Mm. I think a lot of such recreation of reality concepts have originated in Scandinavia. So I was once very fascinated by the concept of solarium, which is kind of a unique way of having sun in cold places like Scandinavia. But one of the concepts that I really like about coupling off, or in Swedish koppla off, is that you take a break from your work. And I want you to explain to our users our viewers, a concept that is very famous in Scandinavia in general, and Sweden especially, which is lagom. If you can explain what that is.
Yeah, yeah. So that is, I think that's a word that I don't think exists in many other
No, it
countries.
doesn't.
But so I think from at least this is, I don't know if this is actually true, but the way that I've heard is that its origin is from the Viking age, and when the Vikings, when they wanted to have a party, then they needed to distribute the drinks because they had a limited amount of drinks. So that meant that you couldn't get your full cup, because that would mean that maybe the person down the table, he would get nothing. So then they invented this concept which is called lagom, which means that it's not too much and it's not too little. It's just just enough. So for the Vikings, it's meant that then everyone would have approximately the same amount of drink in their glasses.
All right. And I think it's a very good lesson for a lot of us living in times of unbridled individualism, that we think about other people, and extending them the same courtesy that we expect of ourselves. On that note, thank you so much, Håkan. It was a pleasure talking to you. I think that was the first time ever that you've come across on a podcast with a candid conversation that long, and hope to see you again also, and hearing from your initiatives. I'm very hopeful that this is going to be a lot more helpful. A lot of people who are looking for resources in AI, and at some point we're going to love to have you back also.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and I hope that all of you viewers who are listening to this or now in the future will be inspired of this. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much again.